You could soon be paying more for items made from cotton. We are talking about inflation, higher energy prices, and the Russian attack on Ukraine, helping to drive up prices of cotton and production costs for the growers. We're joined by Jon Devine, senior economist at North Carolina-based Cotton Incorporated. It's a group financed by the cotton industry, among its jobs, educating the public about cotton. Thanks very much for coming on the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
So just remind us, America is a huge producer of cotton. Where would you fit in the export pecking order globally?
That's right. So in terms of production, we're number 3, but in terms of exports, so we're number 1, and we account for about a third of global cotton exports.
That's massive. Wow. So it's a huge crop worldwide. And where is it? Is it in the U.S. South? Is that where the bulk of the growing takes place?
Yeah, cotton in the U.S. has grown in 17 southernmost states, spread out across the U.S. Our biggest cotton producing state is Texas.
Tell us so we're looking at a multi-year chart for cotton. It was very high back around 2011. Well, same time as copper was very high as well. Then it went sideways, got down to about 60 cents a pound, but we're looking at prices almost 3 times that now. What has pushed cotton higher?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a range of factors that have contributed to it. I think one of them is similar to that last spike is that we're coming out of a recession. During recessions, you can see drawdowns in inventory as companies want to preserve cash and stay alive to fight another day. On the flip side of that, when we come into a recovery, you've got to refill those pipelines. And what that can do is create a scramble and some scarcity, and that can help push prices for commodities like cotton higher. On top of that, there's been some reshuffling of supply chains due to changes in trade policies in recent years. And the shipping crisis is compounding those effects. In terms of supply and demand, there's nothing screaming scarcity, but the U.S. is tight. We already talked about how the U.S. is the world's largest exporter. Last crop year, we had some issues with the weather, and we also had very strong export demand. This crop year, the weather is better. There is some more cotton here in the U.S., but the shipping crisis is making it hard to get that cotton out the door, creating some scarcity and also potentially pushing on prices higher.
And how much of the world's cotton is used for clothing? I guess the vast bulk.
And there's no hard and fast rules in terms of, or proportions in terms of how much cotton goes into the clothing versus other things. But the rule of thumb that we have is about 75% of cotton goes into apparel. About 25% goes into home textiles like towels and sheets. And then the rest goes into nonwoven or medical products.
What about Ukraine? Was Ukraine a grower of cotton? I know it was a huge supplier of grains. I've never heard of it growing cotton, but maybe they did.
Right. It's a little too cold over there to grow much cotton. So the effects are more indirect. So we take a look at where cotton is grown. We already talked about being grown in the southern parts of the U.S. In many of those regions, they can substitute with other crops, potentially corn or soybeans, most commonly. So when you see the knock-on effects from Ukraine lifting corn prices in particular, also wheat prices, these are all interconnected by the competition for acreage. It makes the competition for the acreage a little bit more difficult for cotton. Another impact, and this affects all agricultural commodities, is the effects that the war has had on energy prices. Energy prices can be tied to input prices like fertilizer, and that's making the cost side of the equation difficult for growers, even if the prices and the revenue side are more attractive.
It's interesting. Now, you may have touched on this, but we've got these high prices for corn and soybeans, and I guess that's tempting some farmers to switch to those crops, further curtailing cotton supply.
Right, yeah. So normally, with cotton prices at these levels, we would have growers, clicking their heels, being very happy. But in the current situation, there's more hand-wringing than heel clicking. That's due to the fact they've got tough decisions to make about which crop to plant. They've got tough decisions about which investments to make and inputs. It's a very uncertain time period for growers.
And so if I'm a farmer is North Carolina, is it a pretty big cotton growing state?
We do grow a decent amount of cotton
Oh, sure.
in North Carolina. Most of that's extends on the eastern part of the state,
Sure.
but we are one of the larger producers.
If I'm a North Carolina farmer, is it fairly straightforward for me to switch from cotton production to corn? I mean, the field, the nutrients and stuff like that, is it straightforward, the substitution?
Yeah, so there's regular crop rotation for soil health. So growers, in North Carolina and other parts in the southeast growing region, commonly will look at cotton, corn, soybeans, and then peanuts can also be thrown into that mix.
Cotton, obviously, traditionally a very labor-intensive crop, the harvesting, the picking of the cotton. Has it been automated in recent decades?
Yeah, so I mean, since World War II, there's been increased mechanization in the cotton industry. Here in the United States, you can have, farms that are quite large that only have, 2 or 3 employees
Well,
due to the fact that, we are using a lot of mechanized labor out there.
and then where's the where's the cotton process? Because of course that was really the heart of Britain's industrial revolution. Where drawing the cotton and turning it into fibre. Where is the cotton processed? Does America export raw cotton or textiles, or how does that work?
Yeah, so we take a look at supply chains for the textile industry. They are very global and they tend to be very non-vertical. So we already touched on U.S. being a major exporter of cotton fiber. We don't spin a tremendous amount of cotton fiber here at home anymore. We export on average something like 85% of our crop each year. That fiber goes all around the world. We ship a lot of it here in the Western Hemisphere to our neighbors located a little bit to the south of us. But we also ship a tremendous amount of cotton over to Asia, and most of the world's cotton spinning is concentrated in Asia. That means China, but also the Indian subcontinent, including India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan.
Why would the spinning be in Asia? Because I'm guessing that's a more automated process than garment making.
Yeah, it certainly is more automated, but you want to have your supplies close to your demand, and I think it's just allocating the spinning capacity over there close to cut and sew operations has been a way the industry has been able to make it work.
What about climate change? Is it affecting the belts in which cotton can be profitably produced in the United States?
Well, it's like with climate change, what we're getting is a lot of increased variability in the weather. And of course, variability can be complicated. Some issues that we can face is a drought out in West Texas. We do plant a lot of cotton out there. Cotton is a drought-tolerant crop. That's why it's really the only viable option in places like West Texas, where there isn't a tremendous amount of rain. But even though cotton is drought tolerant, it does require some moisture. Right now, things are very dry out there in Texas, and there's some concerns about whether or not that region will be able to make a crop this year.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Jon.
Thank you.
Jon Devine, senior economist at North Carolina-based Cotton Incorporated.